So first of all, I want to thank you all for joining this call and for your interest in the Thriving Earth Exchange program. I think as you all know by now, the Thriving Earth Exchange is a program of the American Geophysical Union that brings together community leaders and scientists to solve local challenges related to natural resources, climate change, natural hazards, including those related to human health. I'd just like to say, it's not just climate change. This is the American Geophysical Union. So we answer all sorts of environmental questions. And a lot of those do have relations to health and climate change. So there's a whole wealth of possibilities here. The Community Science Fellows play a key role as boundary spanners between scientists and communities by helping facilitate projects and promoting a relationship of collaboration and co-creation. I think as you're going to learn from Julia and Neil, you're really a project manager. You're facilitating that relationship as a fellow. And we'll dive into that a bit more in the Q&A, I think, as you guys learn what this means. So we know you have a lot of questions about just what it means to be a community science fellow, and certainly all the changes in the past week and months make this position a little more certainly relevant, but also a little more interesting, because a lot of what is happening now is happening virtually, which is not a big change from how it was happening before, but it adds another element. So this Q&A is a chance for you to hear from and speak with current fellows about their experiences. So I'd like to allow our two speakers, Julia Ginty and Neil Kasmalkar, to briefly introduce themselves and a bit about their projects. And then I'd like to open the floor to your questions. And to do that, because we are a fairly big group, I'd like you to use the raise hand function and I'll call on y'all. And if you could just unmute yourselves when you have a question, turn on your video if you're comfortable with that. We'll turn it over to you after Julia and Neil have had a chance to tell you a bit about what they're working on now and how they got involved in the program and their experience so far. So with that, Julia, just because you're right there next to me, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd love to. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Ginty. I'm from Miami, Florida originally, but I'm currently living in Arlington, Virginia. My educational background is in environmental geosciences and sustainability studies.
Sorry, I'm just playing.
And I'm currently working at the National Wildlife Federation, in which I am doing international wildlife conservation. So you can consider that as my day job. But my role within Thriving Earth Exchange, as Erin mentioned, is as a community science fellow. So essentially serving as a liaison and a project manager between our community leaders and our scientists and our research team to help address our community's most pressing priorities. So in terms of our project specifically, my project's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's focused on urban heat island effect, or more specifically, determining how to develop methodology for assessing changes in albedo over time. And the community is really interested in albedo specifically because Cambridge has typically been a cold weather climate. As climate change is advancing, urban heat island is becoming a much more pressing issue. And Cambridge is a very densely populated area with a lot of impervious surfaces. So urban heat island effect is really becoming a serious issue. So the community wants to address urban heat island effect specifically to see whether their climate change resiliency and preparedness plan, which they've been developing for a few years now, is effective or not. Because this is all based on the idea that Cambridge is built with the idea of the climate of the past, and the community really wants to be forward thinking and very intentional about how they can incorporate future design elements that really help to mitigate climate change and just help better the community in general. So yeah, I think that's about it.
Great, thank you, Julia. Neil, tell us about your project and how you got involved.
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Neil. I'm a fifth year PhD student at Stanford. and I'm currently sheltering in place on campus. I'm a mathematician by training, and for my research, I study the impacts of climate change and natural hazards on urban systems. I have been a community science fellow with Thriving Earth Exchange since April 2019. My community is based in Southeast San Diego, California. So this is a diverse low-income community, and its priorities are not always addressed by local officials. So in particular, there is a creek that flows through this region called the Chollas Creek. It is dry for most of the year, and a lot of trash has accumulated in the creek because of littering and dumping. While there are local groups that try to do cleanup, it really hasn't got the attention and resources from local authorities. So Kristen Hurst is an elementary school teacher in the community, and she wanted to raise awareness about the environmental problems of the Chollas Creek. And she wanted to involve her elementary school students in this process so that they learn about the creek and they become environmental stewards for the neighborhood. So Thriving Earth Exchange connected Kristen and me, and two more local scientists, Carly and Kirsten, joined our team, and we took on this project. So the question was, how do we involve 10-year-old kids in addressing trash problems in Chollas Creek? And safety of the kids was a very important consideration for our project. So for example, we didn't want the kids to actually touch the trash. So the way our project works is that we do a visual survey for trash assessment. Basically, students go on a field trip to the creek and they answer questions in this survey. And these questions are like, how much trash do you see? Is the trash toxic or not? And these are kind of like score on a scale of 1 to 6. And then at the end of the day, you get a score for the creek, for the health of the creek. So this is a survey we took an existing survey and modified it to make it more kid-friendly. And we had the input from the students also to prepare this survey. And so up until COVID-19, we were doing monthly surveys with the students for different regions of the creek. The Thriving Earth Exchange team would guide the students. We would go along with them on these surveys. We would troubleshoot, and we would help them with visualization of the data. And the longer-term goal is to present this data to the broader community in Southeast San Diego and raise awareness about it, and hopefully inspire action to clean up the creek.
Great, thank you both. So as you can see, there's a range. Neil is pretty close to his community, Julia's not. I think one very relevant question is one that Neil suggested. How involved have you been in the actual science? For example, data collection, data analysis. No.
Yeah.
I can.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Neil.
Yeah. I guess. So because this is my question, I guess I have some thoughts on it. Yeah, I think so. The way the community science fellowship program is designed is that you should be able to do everything virtually, and that is kind of the setup. But that being said, I think it's also kind of a choice that you have about how involved you want to be in the project. So, I mean, like, no one's stopping you from doing more science and being more involved. And especially in my case, I was lucky enough that San Diego was just, is reasonably close. And I really loved actually going on field trips with the students to do the trash assessments. Like, it was one of the best parts of the project. And so it comes down to like, what role do you want to play in the team? Maybe you can also help with the science if you want. And so you just have to think to yourself about like, how much time do you have? and how much energy you want to invest in it.
Julia?
Yeah, and to just build on that, I think also it depends on the needs of the community and the type of project that you're doing. In my case, my project's a little bit unconventional in that we aren't really doing data collection. So we're using data sources that already exist. We're using remotely sensed data, like tree canopy data, impervious surface data, surface temperature data, those kinds of things. And our scientist is developing a methodology using that pre-existing data. So I think it depends. If my project was more of a data collection oriented project, then the reality might be different. But in this case, I'm not doing a lot of data analysis or those kinds of things. And neither are our community leaders, John and Drew. So our scientist Mehdi is really doing all of the analysis.
Cool. So if you have questions, please use the raise hand function and I'll call on you. Give a couple seconds for those questions to form. In the meantime, maybe you guys could answer what surprised you most about this experience. You know, you go through this training and then you're matched with a community and it's kind of in your hands to develop that relationship and scope the project and find a scientist. Maybe you can describe what surprised you or what you've really enjoyed, what you've learned most about things. I'll let you respond to that, and then we have a couple raised questions. We have lots of raised questions. Raised hands.
Sure, well, I can go first. What surprised me? I think probably how many scientists were interested in collaborating on this project. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Thriving Earth Exchange's processes. Essentially, it's a 4-step process. So the first step is scope, in which you're kind of sussing out the project and determining what needs to be prioritized. And then the second step is match. So my match process took a lot longer than I anticipated, just because there are so many different scientists to parse through. So I spent a lot of time talking to different scientists and just trying to gauge what their level of involvement would be. And that's not necessarily something I anticipated being such an intense process. It was something I very much enjoyed, but I didn't think that there would be such an immense response. So that was really cool. And I think that working on the project in general has just been like a really great way to get more of an inside look into the realm of community science. And I know that this is a space I really want to explore more as I get further into my career. So it's just been like a really good way to get kind of a different perspective, because when you're working in a space as a scientist and you're doing data analysis, is very different than managing a project and working with community leaders from more of a top-down perspective. So it's just been really great, and it's interesting to see specifically how my community is working to engage in these issues of resiliency, particularly to climate change, because I don't know, you don't really think about cold weather climates as much when you, well, personally, when you hear the term climate change. I think more of like communities that are more frontline, like you think of coastal communities that are dealing with sea level rise or natural disasters and those kinds of things. So seeing this specific context has really opened my eyes, and it's just been really a really great experience that I just value it a lot.
Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so let me just second some of the things that Julia mentioned, which is I think one of my favorite parts about working with Thriving Earth Exchange has just been like interacting with the people in this sphere, because I think I just found them to be very amazing and just very passionate about environmental issues and climate change. And it has always been a delight to just have conversations with them about like the things they're working on and their ideas and so on. Something that I've found surprising, or I wasn't really, it wasn't at the top of my mind before doing this project, was kind of doing science in an academic setting. We are sometimes not equipped to present that science to a community, and like kind of the words we use or the things we take for granted when we are like presenting the science. So especially working with elementary school students, like we have had to think a lot about how do we simplify this piece of science so that they can understand it, and how can we involve them into our process so that they feel like they have ownership of the project. And so like these additional considerations that come in community science, I think are just very useful things to be aware about.
Great. So we have at least 3 questions. Ardana, do you want to lead? Then Chris, then Sedia. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you. Thank you, Erin, for hosting this question answer, and Julia and Neil for sharing your experience and some of the process of how your project was implemented. But I think one big question I had was, what was one of your biggest challenges that you came while doing this program and trying to implement your project? And how would you advise a fellow incoming intern on how to work towards overcoming these challenges?
Let's see. I think probably the most challenging part for me has just been time management. Just working full time and still trying to be able to prioritize the community's needs, and just finding time to meet that works for everybody was a little bit difficult in the beginning, but I think now I cannot stress enough how incredible my community leaders and my scientists are. They're really amazing. And they're very flexible and they're very communicative. So I think that keeping that open line of communication and just voicing maybe if you're struggling, if you are having time constraints and you need to move things around, being very open with that, that's worked really well for us, because sometimes our schedules don't always align. We may have planned something that worked before and now it just doesn't work anymore. So just being really honest and open, and also just doing really well to like try to foresee any issues that may come up. That really helps with time management, just keeping a good calendar, making sure you're aware of all the meetings that you have coming up, keeping really good notes is very helpful. So those are all the things that have helped me.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the biggest challenges, and it has just been an ongoing challenge, is that like doing a community science project, it's very fluid and it's very different from doing a project in an academic setting, because many things change, especially like there are changes in the community. So for example, we've had to change the scope of our project quite a few times just to adapt to what was happening, what was possible by the community in this case, like what students were able to do versus what the teacher wanted them to do, and so on. And so it was just like we had to be ready to be able to make those changes. There was a period in the middle where we were not sure if the teacher would be able to renew her position in her school, right? And so that would have put all our project on hold or something. And so these were just new considerations I had to kind of learn to live with. And it taught me the importance of like having contingency plans. So yeah.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi. Thank you for hosting this. It's been really interesting listening to you. I'm also currently in San Diego, so it's nice to hear about science being done in my backyard. Two general questions. How much time would you say these projects are taking out of your day or a week or however much? I know, Julia, you mentioned time management being crucial. And then the second question is kind of, what do you see taking from this, and what do you think your next steps are beyond the fellowship?
So I can start with this question first. Yeah, so it changes from week to week, but I would say on average it would be maybe 2 to 4 hours per week. I personally don't consider that as a very big time commitment. Certainly, there were like some times when all those the time got like, you had to put all those time chunks together. So like when we were like making a presentation and we needed input from everyone, or in the early phases when we were doing some literature review and it was like time was of the essence and we needed to move fast, or doing data visualization. So it changes from time to time. The good thing about having a team is like you can kind of shift your weight around and have other people pick up some of the slack if needed. Right, was that the first part of your question, and was there another part which I'm missing?
So the second part was, what do you hope to take from this, and where do you see yourself going after the fellowship?
Right. So actually, yeah, my project in San Diego, it's about to finish this month. So this is a very relevant question. But yeah, so the rest of my team, they will be continuing to do these kind of trash assessment runs in San Diego. And the elementary school teacher, she's made it very clear that she wants to continue this. For me personally, I'm interested in continuing to stay involved with Thriving Earth Exchange, maybe do more projects, but in different regions.
Perhaps I can answer the second part of the question first and then jump back into the, into the first half, if that's okay. As I kind of mentioned, this project is really important to me because I'm really interested in learning more about how communities are building resiliency to climate change. So after this project's done, I already feel like I've gained just a much deeper insight into what it means to work with communities from different contexts. But I'm really interested in getting a little bit more into disaster mitigation work, particularly as it pertains to frontline climate communities. So I think that this, working on this project has given me a lot of those skills, and also especially project management skills. So that I think that'll really be valuable in my future endeavors. And in terms of your first question, could you actually repeat the first half of your question?
Sure. I was just saying, how much time do you think your projects are taking out of your work week?
Yeah, gotcha. I'd like to echo what Neil has said. I think it really varies. It was a lot more time intensive in the scoping and matching phases. As I mentioned, the matching phase was pretty timely. But once we got into the solve and people fell more into their roles and the scientists got more comfortable with the community leaders, that really made it so that I could take a step back, and the community was able to still engage and move forward with the project in a way in which I could be a lot more hands-off, which I think is essentially the point of Thriving Earth Exchanges, to help empower the communities to address these issues and help serve as a liaison. So on average, I'd say sometimes upward of 3 hours a week or 4 hours, but usually maybe roughly an hour a week on average. It really depends. When we are working on something very specific, it can be more than 3 hours, but it really depends.
Great, thank you. Sadia, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
That's fine. It's Sadia.
Sadia, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me if I ask something that's been covered. My internet, I've been having issues. Julie, you actually went to my first question. So I was wondering about the process of choosing the community partners. You've spoken a little about the scientist aspect, but how are those community partners chosen? And then also, going back to what you were saying, Julia, about kind of how the partnership has evolved, what would you say, and you too, Neil, what has affected their empowerment in those partnerships?
So maybe I can answer the first part of that. So just as you guys are applying to become fellows, communities apply to become part of the program as well. And we accept cohorts on a rolling basis. So we have about 3-4 cohorts a year. So those are being chosen to meet the cohort needs by the Thriving Earth Exchange staff. Likewise for fellows, and then we match communities and fellows. And I will say, we are looking now at offering our fellows an option, or at least the chance to indicate which communities they feel they're really interested in working with. Doesn't mean we can guarantee that. That will depend on a lot of internal factors, but we're matching applications from both sides, essentially. Go ahead, Julia.
In terms of what empowers communities to be to take more of a leading role in this, I think having a clear project plan is really important. So for each project, you have a project plan that lays out the scope of the project, what the project's objectives are, the kind of methodologies you're going to use, and who's partnering in the project. So this has been an ever-evolving document, which has formed throughout many conversations, first with the community leaders and I, and then once the scientist was matched with him as well. So I think that having a really clear, and also I think that our community had a very clear idea of what they wanted from the very beginning. So our project scope is very narrow. They wanted to address a very specific problem, and they wanted to do so in a very directive way. So I think that moving from that and having our project clearly defined and developing this project plan, as well as having reciprocal conversations back and forth with the community leaders and the scientists. That's really moved things forward in a way that the community leaders and the scientists are able to just plunge right ahead.
Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that I think of this a little bit differently, which is communities are already very interested in solving their priorities, which is why they're going through this process in the first place. And the only, the kind of piece that we are trying to provide them is the science part. So if we are kind of able to transfer that piece of science to them and make it like communicate it well and help make them comfortable with it, then that is pretty much like the final piece that they need to continue solving or continue addressing their priorities.
Thank you.
Anne, you had your hand up next.
Thanks. Hi. I'm curious, now that both of you have gone through the process and you're well involved with the community, I'm sure you've learned a ton. If you could go back to the very beginning of the project, learning what you know now in the fellowship, is there anything that you would have done differently?
That's a good one. I'm going to need a second to think about that.
Yeah, me too.
We can come back to it too if you want some extra time.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm giving a very meaningful answer. I think maybe something that I would have thought about a little bit more, even though this was very much emphasized in our fellow training, would be the kinds of communication tools that I would use, specifically getting the project started in communicating with our community leaders, because working to schedule meetings, as I mentioned, time management can be a bit of an issue sometimes, especially when you're starting out and you're not familiar with everyone's schedules. So originally we tried using Skype, and that was just very confusing because, you know, there's like Skype for Business and regular Skype and all of those different platforms, which will drive me crazy in a heartbeat, before we finally settled on using Zoom. So I think that really being intentional and like trying to determine what platforms are best, because there are so many different kinds of platforms and software too. There are a lot of like scheduling software, like Doodle and like those kinds of things. Those don't work well for my community at all. They'd rather just have a conversation about scheduling face to face. And that's been something that I also will mention as a piece of advice. Trying to schedule your next meeting while you're in a current meeting is really helpful. So yeah, just being intentional about like having a set of communication tools that work well for everyone, and being certain that you stick to those.
I will definitely echo the piece about communication tools. Sometimes like some community leaders are more comfortable with certain tools than others, and you might have to like jump around a little bit so that you know, you can get information to the community well. I think something else I would do differently is that when I started the project, I had a very a rigid framework in my mind about what should be done. So we were like listing out in very detail what the outcomes should be and what the timeline should be, and how things would progress. And over the course of the project, while they have been good guidelines, the outputs and the timeline, we were not following it to the T, and there were many changes that happened to the project, and that's generally the case for projects which involve like real life science. So just being like it's good to plan ahead, but just having some room for flexibility and adaptability of the nature of the project. I think if I had that in mind previously, maybe we could have spent less time on the planning piece and just like taking things more as they go along.
Thank you. Those are both, I think, really helpful, useful, concrete responses. Thanks, guys.
All right, Encore, and then Jessica, and then maybe back to Chris.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. That's been valuable feedback. I wanted to ask if, due to the pandemic, if the community priorities have shifted, and how has that affected the overall goals of the project in your experience?
So I can take this one first. So because we were working with an elementary school, and since the elementary school has been closed down for quite a few months, so that basically stopped all our field trash assessment surveys and everything. So we can't work with the kids anymore. And so that basically just stopped our project. And this happened around March or so. So then everyone is still interested in continuing doing the trash assessments once the school reopens, which might be later in the year. But we decided to change the outcomes of our project. So originally we wanted to do like an exhibition with student posters about trash in the creek, which would have been really exciting, and we would have had lots of people who were visiting. But now we've decided, like, so one, we weren't able to do all the data or the trash assessments we wanted to do. So instead, we decided to publish on the web our methodology. And recently, the team wrote up a blog about, which is basically the story of kind of how the project came to be and all the things we did. And we consider these as the outcomes of the project.
In terms of my project, as I mentioned, we're not doing any data collection, so my project is purely analytical. So our project hasn't really been affected at all by COVID. Things are going pretty much as planned, on schedule. And we even had a conversation about maybe taking a step back if people felt more comfortable putting the project on pause. But both the community leaders and the scientists just really wanted to move forward, particularly because all of the data already existed and everything was being done remotely anyways, so.
Thank you. Those are great answers. Thank you.
Jessica.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, how did you navigate working with the community that you may have been less familiar with, and what was that like?
I think our community provided a lot of background information on their needs. We had a lot of discussion on their needs, and that really helped me help me wrap my head around the origin of the issues that they wanted to address and the rationale for the specific scope of our project. So I think that was really helpful, but then also just doing some background research to become a little bit more familiar with urban heat island effect, for example, because that's the focal point of my project. That's been really helpful. But I think it's primarily through these conversations with the community. I asked them a lot of questions up front, did a lot of research. I used all of the tools that they gave me. So I think that all of that really helped me become familiar, both on the front end before the project even started, and then also just in the beginning stages of the project.
Yeah, I completely second everything that Julia said. Just having more conversations with the community leaders, and for me, doing background research about the problems of pollution in Southeast San Diego, that was very helpful. And of course, like in the early few months, it's a slightly uncomfortable position to be part of this project about a region which you don't know anything about. But for me, I became more comfortable as I learned more and just interacted more with the community. So probably it will also, like, as you learn more, it will also become easier for you.
Great, thank you.
I just want to add, any new position can be a little uncomfortable at first, but you do have to understand that the community leaders are really passionate about their projects. Otherwise, they wouldn't have applied to work with Thriving Earth Exchange in the first place. So I think that this level of engagement and passion that they have for these issues really helps facilitate that process as well.
Any more questions? Encore, do you have a second question?
Oh, sorry. I think I didn't unraise my hand. How do I? I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay, there we go. I don't have another question.
Okay. Sadia?
Yes. So was there much training for you as a fellow, or did you just refine skills that you already had? And that's coming from the fellowship level, not at the community level.
Yeah, so we had a 2-day, very intensive fellowship training in which we just helped us get familiar with Thriving Earth Exchange's processes, what it means to do community science, the difference between community science and citizen science, and those kinds of nuances, how to communicate science effectively, how to work with communities, and even how to find scientists, different resources that are available, conflict mitigation, all kinds of things. So that it was a very comprehensive training. So I think that was very helpful.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I came to learn about Thriving Earth Exchange or like the more detailed parts about it by doing workshops at the AGU. And so there also, like, it's a form of training. In general, just every project is different. And so the workshops can give you like a general perspective about interacting with a community. And it's also like very helpful, like the way they divide it with the different phases. So they put a structure to it. What I found more useful is just kind of the monthly interactions with the Thriving Earth Exchange staff members, or just mentioning to them that I'm running into these issues, and then they have some feedback about it, and it's like a on the spot learning process for me. So that kind of help I found really valuable when doing these projects.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, obviously current events are affecting how we will be training fellows going forward, at least this year. The whole staff is working on making a combination of asynchronous training modules that you all would go through, and then building in pieces that would be synchronous, most likely virtually. And we have held the dates September 24th and 25th as our official launch dates. So if we can meet in person, we will. I think we're all thinking that's going to be pretty unlikely. But we will have somehow some live portion together where we really get into some of these meatier questions about working with communities. And a lot of that will, again, be led up by these asynchronous training modules that you'll be able to engage with before we do that in-person bit. It's very much evolving. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. We're developing that as the world changes. And just to build on what Neil was saying, we do meet with each fellow cohort at least once a month as a group where we talk about where we are with our projects, how things are going. And it's really an effort where people help other fellows think through some of their challenges, or just see that they're in the same place. There is a lot of mentorship that will happen. I will be managing this science policy and engagement cohort, but you will also be engaging with the rest of the Thriving Earth Exchange staff and have a specific mentor that you can call on anytime and say, I'm really running into trouble here. So you have a lot of support from Thriving Earth Exchange, including some of those scheduling and meeting tools that Julia was mentioning.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Jessica, your hand's still up, but I think that's another case of forgotten raised hand. Anne, go ahead.
Hi there. I just popped this in the chat window, but I want to take a minute to speak up if we have time. I'm a scientist who's currently planning a research project, but I don't have any connections with the community that this research will probably impact. But I'm wondering if the fellowship might be the right opportunity to start involving the community if I don't actually have those relationships formed yet.
I'd say probably not, unless that community has come to us asking for a scientist to help them with a specific project. The thing that I really need to emphasize about the Thriving Earth Exchange is it's community-led. So the communities come to us and say, we have this issue, we want to do some research, and that's not how they would phrase it mostly. Depends on your community leader, but they come to us saying, we want help with this. And we then help link them with scientists, we being staff and fellows, who can help answer those questions. And that's a very different model from the scientist saying, I want to research this question in this community because it fits, in my hypothesis list of needs. That said, I think if you feel that you can manage this additional activity, you might really like engaging with a whole other community from the Thriving Earth Exchange program as kind of a way to learn how you might work with that community that you want to do a science project in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I understand and really appreciate why you're doing it that way. Yeah.
Both have value. I don't want to undermine that at all, but I think the Thriving Earth, what makes Thriving Earth very different and very special is it's very community-led. And I think Julia and Neil have spoken to this very well. It's not them coming in and saying, oh, I have a scientific background, let me show you how to do this. Oh yeah, and maybe I'll bring in a scientist who knows a little bit more about it. It's really, we're helping manage that thought process, if you will. Like, how do we go about this? How would we bring in a scientist who really has the skill set and the soft skill set to engage productively with the community and let those communities drive the bus, basically. Any other questions? Give everybody a few seconds to think about that. Marie has a question. What are the differences between the Gordon Moore Foundation grants just advertised and the Thriving Earth Exchange program described here? So the Thriving Earth Exchange program is a program that was developed about 6 years ago, and I'm probably going to get my years a little bit wrong there. Because AGU saw a need for science to be more responsive to community needs. And it was kind of part of a centennial challenge. Most of the work that we do at Thriving Earth Exchange is funded kind of internally, whereas this Moore Foundation grant is from the foundation. And thank you for asking that, Marie. What this specific cohort will be basically is guinea pigs for adding in very directed policy and engagement components into both the fellows training and into training that we'll have with the whole project teams. And by project teams, I mean you as the fellows, the community leaders, hopefully also the scientists, about how to really engage productively with A, the broader public, B, the media, and C, policymakers, not just at the end of the project where you're like, ta-da, this is really great. Somebody put it on the media, please. We really want that engagement to start at the beginning and to really help make the project stronger because there's a lot more understanding, broad understanding of what is happening from the very beginning. So we'll be adding those into the trainings that will happen, and that will become further down the road part of the general fellows program. But you guys would effectively be helping test the waters for this, co-creating with me how that will happen. And it is, let me emphasize, very much co-creation. This isn't just coming from me. It's going to be, I propose something, and then you would say, hey, you know, this didn't quite work for me, or what about this? Why don't we explore this further? So we're kind of doing the community science as our own little community. So let me back up. If anybody has questions, go ahead and raise your hands. So Melissa put a link in there for Marie. So is it worth applying to both from the beginning here? Marie, do you mean, is it worth applying as both a scientist and a fellow? I'm gonna, okay, so you're asking, as several people have, if you have a relationship with a community and they are also interested in engaging with Thriving Earth Exchange and you would serve as the fellow, that's fine. It's something that we'll want to discuss with you individually to make sure that that will work. We do have a number of people who have relationships in the community where they live with like a public health officer or environmental department, somebody, and they've both looked at Thriving Earth Exchange materials and see roles for themselves working together in this. And I'd say, talk to me, shoot me an email, and we'll jump on a call to discuss that further. It's not out of the question, but we just do want to make sure that that will be a good relationship. And for those of you who are scientists and want to serve with Thriving Earth Exchange as a scientist, you can absolutely do that. You can also be a fellow, and I'd actually encourage you to do all three if you have the ability, not all at once probably, but serving in all of those roles I think would be very interesting and very rewarding. As a scientist, you would be contributing expertise. I will say that you might wait a while before we have a project that fits your expertise. But certainly we do have a database, would love to have your name in that if you'd like to be the kind of scientific expert for a future Thriving Earth Exchange project.
I would like to add that being a project manager was a very interesting experience for me, just purely from the operations and logistics side about, you know, how do you make this project work and how do you plan it through. So I definitely learned a lot, and I still, there were a few opportunities to do science in it as well. So I would definitely say like being a project manager is really fun and you should definitely consider it.
Right, we have 5 minutes left. Julia and Neil, you kind of said last words, but if you have additional last words, you'd be very welcome to say those here. If anybody has other questions, please email me. We definitely want you guys knowing what you're getting yourself into. If after this hour you're like, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this just now, just let us know. And let's talk about it. We can always put you on hold and we'd roll your application into a future cohort if you're just at a point where COVID or whatever else you're thinking, probably not the right thing for me to get engaged with right now, but I'm still interested. Just let us know. Julia, do you have any last words to put you on the spot?
Sure. I'd just like to reiterate, I know I've said this 100 times, this is really an incredible experience. So I honestly highly recommend applying for the fellowship. And then as Erin mentioned, there are definitely opportunities to be engaged as a scientist later on. And maybe having that fellowship experience might give you a little bit more insight into what is needed and expected from a scientific perspective.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody has any last questions, speak now or hold your peace until you shoot me an email. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for attending our Q&A. I think this has been really great for me to listen to everybody's questions and answers. And hope to see your applications rolling in. We will be reviewing applications shortly. The deadline does close next Friday. We'll let you know about the initial review, get you lined up for an interview with one of the staff, and move forward. And again, this cohort in particular has room for 8. It does not mean you would not be invited into a future cohort. We do launch them pretty regularly. We want as many people as we can get into this, but we also want to make sure that we can have a manageable number going at one time. I think with that, everybody have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions.
Thank you very much to Julia and Neil for going along with this and providing us with your experiences.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.
And bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.